right here at Pragmatic Works. And who am I? As you can see from the screen, I've been a database administrator for a very long time. I've supported multiple database engines, SQL Server, Oracle, and Ingress, to name a few, and plus a few others along the way, along with multiple OS platforms. And yes, VMS is in there too, because I've done that as well. And you know, Azure, working on that, worked on Windows, worked on Unix, been around. I'm also really proud of the fact that I'm a local SQL Server user group leader and also a regional supporter. I make it a point of getting out there to the community and talking to it. And I'll get my community hat on here and say to all of you, I think it's really important to get out there and join up with a local group and meet other people. It's really been transformative for my career, and you just know there's other people out there who can talk the same language that you are. I also get out there and I present at SQL Saturdays. Look at SQLSaturday.com. You're going to see a SQL Saturday close by to you. They're every weekend now. It's easy to find data conferences. They're a lot of fun, meet a lot of neat people. So backups. I was thinking about this. My very, very first professional IT job, I was aware of the concept of backups, but I didn't really understand what the importance was. And one of the things I'm going to really harp on here is about working with the business. There's lots of great, smart people out there who've done presentations on backups out there, and we are going to talk about some of the details and what you need to do, but I really think it's important to have those critical conversations with the business to make sure that that IT can be a value-added department, an asset to the organization, because IT understands these principles, and the business may understand the principles, but IT can help guide them to an acceptable answer that meets the needs of the business, that is cost effective and can preserve business continuity. Going back to the very first, my very first job though, I remember having a discussion with the owner about why it was that we couldn't reuse the same backup tape night after night. That could we please just go spend, it was expensive back then, could we go spend $100 and buy 7 tapes so we could at least have a week's worth of backups? And I think that was my first real view into what you needed to do in order to maintain that business continuity. This is not a disaster recovery presentation. I'm encouraging you to come to the, I'm going to be doing these every Tuesday. So the 4th one is going to be on disaster recovery, and we're going to definitely talk about more of those concepts then. So backups. As you can see, let's see. Get this out of the way. Everyone can see all my notes and everything like that. Definition of a backup. You can read from my screen as well. The database backup is the process of backing up the operational state, the architecture, and the stored database of the database software. It enables the creation of a duplicate instance or copy of a database in case the primary database crashes, is corrupted, or lost. So think about that, what it means to the business. Again, continuity. From anywhere, from everyone's time is valuable, whether you're a single person company or if you're an international multi-thousand staff international company. Every person is being paid by the company in order to enter their data, and it's saved in your system. And guess how you keep track of that? Through your backups. What do they mean to the IT staff? They mean time and responsibility. IT is responsible. One of their main jobs is to make sure that those backups are done on time and are available for the restore, which we'll definitely be talking about. What does it mean to the bottom line? It's cost and savings. It is a cost. Storage, even though the common nowadays is that storage is cheap. Storage is cheap enough, but it still costs money. It's not so much that the actual space is cheap, but the infrastructure in order to provide that space does cost a lot of money. So those backups cost money. Think about the network bandwidth that you have to have in order to make sure that your backups are available. When you're doing your offsite backups, you have to allow for the time it takes. You have to organize the location in order to keep your backups safe. All of these things, that's all part of the bottom line. But it's also a savings. And I'll quote myself right here, is that the banking of the time of all the employees that contribute to entering the data, not just the employees that enter the data, but the staff that provides the infrastructure, the staff that utilizes the data, and the intangibles of the impact upon the customers when the staff is unable to provide information to them, thereby losing sales and worse. So imagine if you're in some sort of a sales organization, your primary ERP goes down, customer calls up and says, well, I'd like to know what your inventory is on this SKU. Here's your salesperson or your sales support person saying, well, actually, I'm sorry, I can't actually tell you if we have any of these products in stock. If you're lucky, the customer is going to be patient with you and call back when your systems are back online. But it could be that you just lost that sale. And I've read quotes about how that it's 10 times harder to keep a customer than it is to get a customer. So if you just lost that customer, what did that do to the business? Now multiply that times 10, times 100, times 1,000. The point is that you need to be able to quickly restore the backups so that you can maintain continuity for the system. Restores. Same sort of concept. What is a restore? Again, quoting from Technopedia, the process of recording the data to the desired point in time. This is important because it's not just restore the system, but restore the system to this point in time because maybe the data was misentered by a staff person. It happens. You had to do a restore point in time because you need to do an audit. Now this isn't necessarily a business continuity issue, but it's one of the many uses that you can use for a good resource, which is why I'm listing here as continuity and flexibility is what it means to the business. Or the system was completely lost and the restore needs to be made as close to that point as possible. Finally, nowadays with malware, oftentimes your system can get locked up and you need to do that bare metal restore wherever your platform may be, but or your data center. You have to make sure it's available. So we've talked about how that one of the advantages of good restores is that not only does it maintain business continuity, but it also it gives a lot of flexibility to the system. And we're going to talk about some neat little tricks that you can do to both test your backups as well as providing flexibility to the business. IT, time and responsibility. The backups have to be safe, but they also have to be available. Your backup is only good as your next restore, and you'll probably hear me say that more than a few times. But you have to make sure that you have multiple backups available, and you need to have multiple locations. Down the road, one of my slides is called defense in depth, and it's because not only do you need to have the backups immediately available on your local system, but you also need to have your offsite backups available too. And you need to think about how long is it going to take to get those backups back so you can restore. Bottom line, whoops. There we go. Finally, like I said, again, the quote about how that the banking of all the time of the employees that contribute entering the data, not just the employees that enter the data, but the staff that provides the infrastructure, the staff that utilizes the data, and the intangibles, the impact upon the customers when the staff is unable to provide information to them, thereby losing sales and worse. The restore is the validation of all that time that was spent on the system. Again, go back to single employee, 1,000 employee system. How much time was spent by the business to pay for the salaries of all that staff to enter that data? So now you can start thinking about how important backups really are. Who's responsible? If you're actually lucky enough to be in an environment where you have more than one person who's responsible for the backups, then you may have the idea of a junior and a senior staff. Excuse me for a second. It's a core task for any DBA, no matter the database, the engine, the OS, and the environment. It's often given to a junior staff member because it's a good way for them to cut their teeth. They get to learn about the environment, they get to learn about the business drivers, but that junior staff person is not necessarily going to know all the nooks and crannies, all the little bits and pieces that make the business important. They're not going to have that exposure to have talked to the different departments and understand what are the drivers for the business, what are the drivers for that department, what systems are truly critical. I mean, if you ask any user, is their system critical? Of course they're going to say it's critical because that's what makes their job happen every day. But it's a matter of having that experience with the business to understand. So if you think about giving the senior staff, so the senior staff is going to have the overall view of the environment. They're going to know the business. They will have established relationships with all the different business units, and they're going to have a better idea of what are going to be the drivers, what are going to be the RTO, RPO for the business units. And then also with experience, they're also going to understand the underlying infrastructure. Long gone is the day where the database administrator is just responsible for doing a backup of the database. I believe that the modern DBA, or even better yet, the modern data platform expert, is responsible for understanding the underlying architecture, the infrastructure that makes that system happen. It's not just the database, it's also the server that it runs on. You have to be aware of the network. You have to be aware of all these different issues, because all of those are going to impact that restore of that backup. We are going to talk about system level backups a little bit too, just because I think that's incredibly important for this to do. So if you're wanting to give your junior DBA a task, have them go out there and map out what are all the pieces that go together to make a system. Again, more of a DR topic, but we're going to talk about it's not just the system, it's also the application. It's all the different issues. Say, for instance, like let's say you have spreadsheets that are essential for this application. Maybe you have to use spreadsheets to upload the data to the application. Well, where are those spreadsheets located? Is that not important? Is that not essential for business continuity? I'd like to think that the DBAs are unique creatures. They should have a broad range of experience. They should understand a lot of different concepts. And they can ideally work with either it be the junior staff or other team members. And so then IT can work together in order to provide that continuity to the business. So RTO, RPO. The business is going to be able to explain the RTO and the RPO for each department and or application. What are these mystical terms? RPO. How many hours a day or how much data can be lost that is still considered acceptable by the business? If you go to any business, they're going to say 0. That's true. No business wants to lose any data whatsoever. But unfortunately, the cost of that, both in people time as well as in expense for the architecture, it's almost impossible to have 0 data loss. I think that we can come up with some good plans in order to minimize the data loss, but it's almost more important than to worry about 0 data loss. It's more important to understand what is driving that need, what is the business doing, and it's really an opportunity for IT, not just the DBAs, to work with the business and to determine what the real need is. RTO, how long it'll take to restore the data to the point where the business can function again. This works with the RPO, and due to this, you're going to be able to come up with a range of where the business can function. I mean, you'll know the range that you have to work with. So let's go back to RPO. So getting down to brass tacks. You do a full backup. Okay, that's your line in the sand. It's done. So you go an hour, and if you had to restore, that means you lost an hour worth of data. You go 12 hours, you lost 12 worth of data. If you go 24 hours, you've lost 24 hours of data. That's your RPO. So you have to, that's not your RPO, but that's the amount of data that you've just lost. So that's why you have to work with the business, and you have to determine how many hours can they afford to lose. Maybe it's only a couple minutes. RTO, how long will it take to restore the data? So it's not just actually the factor of restoring the backup anymore. It's finding the backup. It's making sure the backup is available. If your backups are offsite, then how long does it take to actually copy the backup over the WAN or to go to a company and have them bring it from offsite storage? That's where your RTO comes in. So it's part of the how long will it take to restore the data to the point where the business can function again. And I talk about juniors and senior people. Why should this be a task for a senior person? Because the senior person has the experience and they have the connections, so they can have these challenging conversations. But why could this be a task for a junior person? Because then they can get the opportunity to work with the business and learn what the drivers are. Again, work with the business. IT adds so much value to a business. and it's important for IT to stand up and show why it's important. IT can have those challenging conversations. I remember way back in some of my jobs when I had these discussions with different business departments, and they had no idea. That's fine. They're not expected to necessarily understand that, but going through and carefully explaining, okay, well, here's your system. How long is it okay for you to be down? Well, we can't be down. Okay, you're going to be down. It could happen. All right, well, I guess we could probably be down for 2 hours. Great. Okay, so we're allowing for 2 hours a day loss. How long can I have in order to restore your system? Let's say if it's really bad. Well, we said 2 hours. Well, it might take longer in order to get the backups to you. And so eventually you can come to an agreement. And the important thing is once you come to that agreement, then you can actually document it. And then you're going forward. This is something that the management of that business can say, okay, we know what we need to do. Now they can start looking at the costs and they can authorize the money, the funds, the time, the staffing, whatever's needed to keep that going. It's valuable for everyone in the conversation, whether you be a junior person, a senior person in the business. Everyone's going to have a better view into how the business works, because in truth, when you do these sort of discussions, you also reveal critical business processes. And by knowing about those critical business processes, you're not going to be caught with your pants down. It happens. But you realize, oh, well, we actually do need that weird little spreadsheet. That is the linchpin. We actually need that web form. We actually, even a matter of like the system, you realize that there's some oddities to the system. Maybe it's something as odd as like maybe it's a bit level or something like that. It's a 32-bit version or a 64-bit. Or there's some little, some little odd database that makes everything happen. That's why it's so important to go out there and talk to the business. So let's talk about different types of backups. As I said, it's important for the modern DBA or the modern data platform expert to understand everything from the system level all the way to the application. These are all important parts. So I will get on, my opinion is that, so VM backups, incredibly important. Most modern enterprises are using VMs, whether they be in the cloud or not, but you have some sort of virtualized server. So I know that there are modern backup techniques. You have your continuous database, your continuous data capture. Great. I am still going to think that a snapshot is still not quite good enough if I'm truly worried about a clean backup of the database. Maybe it's not going to quite catch all the transactions. It might be good. It's going to catch all the databases, all the transactions that were written to disk, but it's not going to maybe get those last 5 minutes, those last 10 minutes. So if you're looking for zero data loss, a snapshot is not quite good enough, but the snapshot is a really good start. So work with your sysadmins, work with your storage admins, whatever the person in your organization, we're talking IT here, that is the one who's responsible for the care and feeding of the servers. Whether it be in Azure, whether it be on-prem, it doesn't really matter. The point is that there are going to be servers around and they need to be backed up. Get those VM backups in place. Make sure as a DBA that you understand when those backups are being taken, how easy it is to restore them, and how long it's going to take to restore them, because that is part of the RTO. If everything just completely just vaporizes, you have to be able to restore from the ground up. Nothing wrong with snapshots. Again, like I said, I mean, snapshots are going to get you really close. One of the nice things about snapshots is that that's a good place to start, and then you do your database backup on top of that. So part of maybe a downtime is that you go ahead and have your sysadmin do a snapshot backup, and then you go ahead and do your full backups. And by putting those two pieces together, you know that you are able to restore. Database backups. Now we're going to show my old-fashionedness because we're going to talk about hot and cold backups. No one talks about hot and cold backups anymore. But I still think it's a valuable concept to think about it. And yes, I understand that I put my slide backwards, and I think that was also important too, because I wanted to, hot versus cold, I wanted to get that concept in place. Hot backups, cold backups, this comes back from when I used to be, when I did Oracle work. That's where that terminology you use more often, but it still applies. So hot backups, any type of backups where the database is up and running and processing transactions. That means that there could be incomplete transactions in the database. Most any modern relational database engine has the concept of as a hot backup. Even Access technically does a hot backup, even though you have to knock all the users out because they have locks on the data. Cold backups, what are they? That's when you shut everything down. And I think this should be a tool in your tool belt, a weapon in your arsenal. It's not critical, but it's the only way when you're talking about doing those snapshot backups, is that if you shut down the database and then you do your snapshot, you have yourself a 100% verified snapshot of the VM that you can move forward with. You know that that is a golden backup, because when you shut down a database, all the incomplete transactions are written to disk and it's solid. Just an idea. It takes time. It may not be a good option for your environment, but it is really something to think about if you can fit in that extra 5 to 10 minutes to do that. And make sure. The other concept is that not really a cold backup, but when you're thinking about, like in SQL Server specifically, if you wanted to detach the database, I mean, that's technically a cold backup. When you detach a database, you're writing all the transactions that were in place to disk. And at that point, that database is now portable. So when you detach a database, you can migrate it. Full versus simple recovery mode. You're going to hear lots of stuff about this. Let's get down to the basics. So let's talk about simple backup first. So simple recovery mode means that the transaction logging, the database in SQL Server specifically, let's go to simple recovery mode. So transactions are still being logged. SQL Server is always logging, unless you put no logging, but we're not talking about that. So simple recovery mode means that as your transactions are processed, once they are completed, an automatic checkpoint happens and the transaction log is truncated. Simple recovery is preferred, is nice because it means that you don't have to use nearly as much space and you don't have to worry about your transaction log file growing out of control. But in simple recovery mode, you still have a full backup. So remember when I talked back about how the idea of drawing your line in the sand. So you do your full backup. You go forward an hour. That means that you have potentially 1 hour data loss. You go forward 6 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours. That's how much data loss you're going to do. Simple recovery mode, you are still doing, you need to do full backups. Where is simple useful for? Simple could definitely be used for dev systems. It could be used for systems where the data is static. A couple different things. There's nothing wrong with using simple recovery mode. Full recovery mode is that all the transactions in the database are fully recoverable. This is where you hear the term point-in-time recovery, because with a combination of your full backups, your differentials, and your transaction log backups, you're able to restore the database precisely to the last time that a transaction log backup was made. So as compared in simple mode, for when a transaction is finished, checkpoint happens, the transaction log is automatically truncated. In this case, it's not truncated. It's not truncated until the next transaction log backup happens. Common misunderstanding is that the full backups actually truncate the transaction log when they happen. No, they don't. Full backups are going to grab enough of the in-play transactions in order to do a restore at that point, but they do not actually truncate the transaction log. The only thing that truncates the transaction log is a transaction log backup. Important to remember. So why use simple, why use full? I think it's important to think about, while it's easier to do simple in some ways because of the overhead, why not use full recovery mode? With developers, aren't your developers developing? Aren't they making changes? You just think about in terms of how many backups you need to keep. Maybe you only keep a day's worth, but the point is that your developers might appreciate it if you're able to restore, go back in time to a point when they made that change that broke the system and they need to go back. If you have space, why not do it? It gets down to how many copies do you need to keep around? That's really where it gets more important. Differentials. So differentials are important. One of the things that I've kind of changed in my mindset over the past 10 years is going from a traditional, we're going to talk about intervals though, but I mean classic pattern would be like a full every day and then maybe a transaction log every 3 hours or 1 hour. One of the things I've realized is that why not do more transaction logs? Again, your transaction log is that point where you're able to establish when the data, your point in time recovery. So why not do transaction logs every 5 minutes? Why not do them every 1 minute? Storage is cheap and you can keep it. That means that you're going to have that capability that you can say, yeah, I can restore that to 10:26 a.m. on Monday, the 12th of February. Isn't that a really useful thing to be able to do when you go back to the business and give them that, say that you have that flexibility? But if anyone's ever done to restore a point-in-time recovery in SQL Server, you have to be able to line up all those transaction logs, and that's where differentials come into play. Or full. A lot of it kind of depends upon the size of your database. So let's go back to the basics. Full backup of the database. Differential, that is all the changes that have happened to the database since your last full backup. So you can see where that a differential might be handy in order to keep track of all those changes, because if you're doing a transaction log every single minute, well, I'm gonna have problems with my math here, but essentially you're doing 60 an hour, and they're going to do 24 times 60. That's a lot of transactional log backups to come up with. So it could be that if you were to do a differential every 6 hours, that's going to minimize the number of transaction logs that you have to have available at that time. Another thing is that it's going to be useful for very large databases, and we're not going to talk about partition databases, but it's just one of those things that we can with partial option, but that's another thing to keep in mind. And then finally, I think I went too far. This is a long slide. And nope, there we go. Okay. Then finally, I see I got my slides mixed up. That's fine. Anyway, the last thing I wanted to talk about was data backups. Is that we're going to talk about data backups a little bit more, but just the idea of the concept of that. Not everything's all about just doing your full differential transaction type backups. It's also think about the flexibility you have in data backups. The idea that you can do you can go through and you can do like, select star into new table name from table name, something like that. If you're getting ready to do work on a database and you're going to be touching a table, why not do a backup of that table? You don't need to do a full backup. Because remember, when you do a full backup and you restore, more importantly, when you do a full backup, you are restoring the whole database to that point in time. Maybe you don't need to restore the whole database to that point in time. Maybe you just need to do work on some table. One of the things that I often do is that I'll create a copy of a table before I start doing work on it. And maybe that's useful for your customers too. The business might appreciate having some of that data exposed in a different format. So you could do a select into a copy of a table and you could export into an Excel spreadsheet. With the very much the obvious advent of Power BI and Tableau, and basically, the fact that the users are able to drive their own reporting, they're going to want more and more access to the database. And you and the database administrator, use the database administrator in that unique point where you can provide that data. Exports and imports. It's not something that is commonly used in SQL Server, but again, it's that way that you can do an export of the whole database, or you can do an export of a couple tables. The main thing is that you have to be flexible, you have to be aware of the different ways that you can provide the data, and you have to, you want to work with the business in order to give them that availability. Again, it gets back to working with the business. They want to be able to report upon their data, and you have the opportunity to help them out with that. Here we go. Azure Backups. Talk a little bit about this one right here. So Azure SQL Database. We're going to just talk about Azure SQL Database and SQL Server and Azure VM. Azure SQL Database, you're covered mostly. So right when you create your first Azure SQL Database, the first full backup is created within like 5 or 10 minutes. And then after that, you get one full per week, you get one differential every 12 hours, and then you get log backups every 5 minutes. And that is covered, and that will be continued to cover. One of the things that's unique about Azure SQL databases is that there's a read access geo-replicated data. So even if the data center where your Azure SQL database is found goes down, Microsoft is going to make sure that you still have access to your backups no matter what. Also, you can store them for up to 10 years, but it's up to you about how much you want to pay for your storage. Over time, it probably gets a little bit expensive. SQL Server and Azure VM, it's all up to you. All you're talking about is SQL Server on Azure VM. It's no different than on-prem. I mean, that's your SQL Server, and you can set it up with all the traditional backup settings. As I mentioned, this slide about defense and depth, why not? Again, in more of a DR type of topic, but if you have to restore, you have to restore. So work with your sysadmin and storage teams. Be nice to them, buy them coffee, buy them gifts. They're the ones who are providing that infrastructure for you and your backups. It's important to work with them because they're your team, and it's also important for you to understand them. Again, it's no longer that DBAs can just worry about the database. You have to understand the underlying architecture that makes up the platform for your database. Full backups. I'm going to push why not do full backups and why not keep it in full recovery mode. Simple mode's fine, do that, it's going to work, but why not do full recovery mode? Think about the storage that you're keeping there too, so that you can determine how many do you need to keep around. Log backups. Once again, think about how, what is the business going to drive? How many log backups should you do per day? Should you do it by the minute, every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes? Again, that is the key metric in order to be able to discuss with the business about how much data loss that they would have to suffer through. And then finally, exports. Whether it be creating export, whether you're doing select in order to create a copy of a table, or if you're using export from SQL Server, there's a lot of value in there, and it gives you that flexibility. You can present data in different formats for the users. Recovery practices. Talk to the business. I know you're probably tired of me saying this already, but it's true. You have to understand what the customers need and want. This is an opportunity, again, an opportunity for the DBA to work with the business, to understand the business drivers, and make it for and improve business continuity. So one of the little tricks that I've learned at places I've worked is that the best way to test your restores, because it's not the backups, it's the restores. The best way to test your restores is to do a nightly restore of your production backups. Do the backup, restore it onto a test system. That way you are validating your backups nightly, and you're providing fresh production data to all of your users. Your users are going to love it. And you've made sure that you restore it, because I mean, I remember other jobs, it's like, well, when do I have time to restore my database and then test it? Why not, let the users do it for you? Everyone's happier. It gives that flexibility. Offsite backups. One of my personal experiences is that I personally recommend that you do your backups directly to your server first, and then you copy them offsite. One of my jobs, I found that if you back up directly to a SAN NAS, you're going to get some nasty waits. Backup buffer, async IO completion, and backup IO, they will all show up. And while you're doing that, it's going to slow everything down on the server. So that can be affecting the performance of the application. Because backups should not be affecting the application. That's one of the things. Backups do not lock the database. Backups may impact your I/O, but they do not lock the database. They're not designed that way. So there's no reason why you can't do as many backups as you want to. But if you're involving network, then you may have a few problems. So something to think about if you are doing attached, like some sort of an attached storage drive, something that's mounted on your server. So more of the DR type of thought is that offsite backups. They should be close, but not too close. Remember we talked about the RTO, the time objective. How long does it take to get those precious backups back to the system? Different ideas there. I mean, again, you're going to have to work with your business and figure out what they're going to need. You have to think about your network. So if you have all of your offsite backups on a cloud device, or I mean in cloud storage, okay, so then your network becomes the biggest bottleneck there. How long does it take to bring back a 50 gigabyte, 100 gigabyte, a 500 gigabyte backup? All these things have to be considered. If you're using physical offsite storage, how long does it take for the person in the truck to bring the backups back on tape? How long does it take to mount those tapes? Or, you know, if you're using SSDs, however the storage mechanism, the point is that it's still going to take a number of minutes in order to shuttle that backup back to your location. It'll take a while to mount it, for lack of a better term there, and then actually restore it. So not only is it an opportunity to work with the business, but it's also an opportunity to work with your sysadmin and your network team. You know, DBAs maybe don't work with the network team, but this is your opportunity. Talk to them. Say, this is what we need to do. This is what the business goals are. How can you help me achieve these goals? Scheduling. How could we forget this? So, basic schedule. It depends on your business, of course. You could do fulls every day at a minimum, and then you can do differentials every 6 hours. You could do logs every hour. It's up to you. What is the business going to support? What is your storage going to support? Can you keep track of it? This is where you need to think about things like automation, and then finally alerts. So do the backups as often as you can. Work with the business, determine what the schedule is. You're going to know. Alerts. So many times I've been in environments where people have not bothered to put on alerts. Alerts are what tells you whether the backups happen or not. If you don't need to have a positive alert saying that the backup happened, even though it's not a bad idea to do. But one of the things it tells you to do is, especially with your dev system. So let's say maybe that you are in, let's say maybe like it'll tell you what happens. Like, let's see if a backup fails, because you need to know that. Or maybe if you have a system on full recovery mode, but you didn't bother to set up your transaction log backups. Alerts are going to tell you when your disk runs out of space, because your transaction log just kept on going and going and going, and you weren't doing transaction log backups and truncating it. The alerts are so critical in order to make sure that you have a view into the environment. Data backups. I mentioned this before. The idea that if you're getting ready to do some work on your system, you can you can go ahead and create a new table name. So like I said, select star into new table name from old table name. Simple as can be. That way you've got your backup of your table available. It's also useful if you wanted to make the data available for other users. You can also schedule these selects. What if you were to schedule that select to be use some sort of a SQL agent job or something like that? You could go ahead and do that select on a daily basis, and then the users would know that that data is available and they can safely view it. Also, scheduling exports, I mentioned before, shared location via Excel. So maybe you have a shared folder that there's an export of the database of key tables that are going right there. So the users go grab them every day. They know that there's going to be fresh data waiting for them. And then Errata, other items. In the SQL Server properties, if you look at them, there's a compressed backup box. You're going to save yourself a lot of grief of just doing that right there, doing from the SQL Server properties. Otherwise, you have to worry about every time you set up a backup, whether you use compression or not. If you set this box to yes, and then you always use the default when SQL Server asks you if you want to compress the backup or not, you know it's covered. Verification, I think it's a great idea. It adds about 10%, I found, to the time of the backup. Make sure that your backups are valid. Tail log backups, another thing to think about in this part of your recovery strategy. We're not going to get into all the different scenarios where you can use tail log backups, but what they allow you to do is that the tail log backup is going to capture those transactions that have not been written to disk yet, because the transaction log backup has not been done yet. Finally, system backups. How can you forget those? Again, oftentimes environments, people have not set these up. It's incredibly critical just based on the time. I mean, you talk about business continuity. If you don't have master and MSDB, you are out of luck. You need to have those restored for the security features as far as your SQL agent jobs, SSIS packages. All these things are contained in these precious little databases. Report server. If you have an SSRS installation, that's where all that information is going to be located. But one little trick you might do is that you could also get in the habit of scripting out your user and role objects in case the restore master fails. Not to mention restoring master is kind of a pain to do. So why not just have all that scary information on the side? Here's your checklist. This is my opinion of all the best ideas that you could do in order to make your work on your environment. Work with the business and your team. You've heard me stress that probably 20 times in this presentation. Work with your IT, work with the IT team, your team, work with the business. Make sure that everyone understands what are the RTO, RPO for the business. You're going to get a better understanding of the business drivers. You're going to be a better IT person to support the business. Automate your restores. Once you get it set up, it's easy to do. Full backups every day, no matter what. And logs if you're depending on your environment. Don't forget your system backups. Additional data backups are something. It's a good idea. It's kind of it's kind of fun to do. It's nice to be able to say, yeah, I can get that for you. And don't forget about your alerts, your compressed backup default, your verified backup default. All good ideas to do. And you've probably seen this one on there before. It's a restore strategy because your backups are only good as your last successful restore. And anyway, quick plug, I will be here every Tuesday for the next 4 Tuesdays talking about different topics. Next week, we're going to be talking about Azure Lift and Shift, so be sure to sign up. So any questions? Let me look at the questions. Okay, we have one question from Matthew. Oh, okay, well, I'm sorry, we have a few more than a few questions. Let's see. Trying to get this right here. Oh, here we go. All right, Matthew Osmansky, I see your question right here. Let's see. Actually, Sue, I'm going to answer your question first. Can we have the recordings of the missed ones? I know that this is being recorded, and it's going to be posted on pragmaticworks.com. Isn't that true, Crystal?
Correct. Can you hear me?
That wasn't fair to Crystal because she had her microphone muted.
I did have my microphone muted.
that was me.
I apologize.
Well, no need to apologize. I'm saying it was mean of me to call you out like that. I should have sent you. So let's go. Matthew, you have a good question. I'm thinking about it a little bit. So Shobit, impact of shrinking database, files and logs. Okay. Yes, as a DBA, you're going to have to do it. If you read through, it's a bad idea to do because what's happening there is that when the database, so you shrink it, it's kind of a bigger question, big picture sort of thing. You need to look at the fact that when your database auto grows, that is IO impact. Databases are all about IOs. You want to minimize IOs wherever possible. So if you have the database auto growing, guess what? That IO is going to be right when your users are doing something critical. So what I would recommend is that if you need to shrink, it's okay to do. First of all, do it in an off time, but also keep a note of what that size was, because that means if your database got up to that point at one point, it probably won't skip to that point again. So do a controlled grow. Go ahead and take it. So let's say your transaction log file was up to 30 gigabytes because you had some sort of long running process. Maybe shrink it down to 15. Maybe shrink them down to 15 gigabytes or something like that. Tony, I see your question too. You don't see the other users' questions. That's fine. So again, the question from Shobit was, what is the impact of shrinking the database files and logs? Overall, you shouldn't do it, but it's something that sometimes you just have to do because you had a long-running transaction. So I believe that you should research, look at the size, the max size of the data files got to, and then go ahead and size them appropriately to minimize auto-grow impact on your database. Another question here is, when restoring nightly to a test system, would the backup fail to as bad, or should further testing being done with the database inside the database to verify the backup's integrity? Great question. That's the whole point, is that, so you've got a couple different checkpoints, or checkpoint, wrong term. You're gonna have a couple alerts it's gonna tell you. So first of all, you schedule your restore, and SQL Server itself is going to give you an alert if the restore fails. So that's why you're gonna know if the actual mechanical part of the backup is good. So it's restored. And then you work with the users, and I hate to tell you this, if the users come back to you and say, well, the data is bad, well, then you've got real problems, because then that means that that backup just merely restored bad data. I mean, the backup is as good as production. So mechanically get the backup restored, but if you find bad data in the test system, I would go back and look at that production system and see if you can find the exact same problems. The question about the recording of the missed ones, again, the recordings are going to be posted here on pragmaticworks.com as a YouTube video, I believe. And then finally, the last question. This is a complicated one. We may want to take this one offline. We have a lot of dev databases. Space is a concern for full backups of all databases every day. How complicated is it to set up a weekly fold and 6 to 7 differentials so we could roll back to any particular day and just risk 1 day of data loss? We don't want to overwrite the diff if it can be avoided. We would like 6 to 7 diffs. Right now, we do 1 full each day, and this is taking up too much space. Excuse me. Okay, I mean, first of all, of course, obvious answer B is that you need to get some more space, but I understand that it may not be a realistic solution. The other thing to be aware of is that your differentials could be possibly as big as your full. That happens. If there's a lot of changes in the database every day, differentials are not necessarily smaller. In fact, transaction log backups can be awfully big as well, depending on the number of transactions. But in answer to your question, simple enough to set up. I mean, it's just a matter of schedule. So if you're going into SQL Server, if you're going through, like, if you're going to set up a brand new maintenance plan, so set up one maintenance plan that does your full every week. You get that schedule in place. Set up another maintenance plan that's going to do your differential. Easy to do. And so you schedule it, and maybe you want to put them into a different folder just to keep track of everything. Hopefully that answers your question. I know that there'd be ways for you to contact me otherwise, because I know that you can talk to Crystal, and we can take this discussion offline if you want to. But again, the actual process of what you're talking about is straightforward. Set up 2 scheduled tasks through SQL Agent. You create your maintenance plans where one is a full backup every week, and then another one where you do a differential every day. And then finally, since space is a concern, set up another, going through the wizard, set up a new maintenance plan that's going to clean up your history. So that will go through and clean up, delete the backups. Make sure you don't have too many backups sitting out there, because of space is an issue. So hopefully that answered your question. Let's see. We have a number of questions, Crystal, right here, looking at pragmaticworks.com. Okay, so first of all, so the person's looking for, figure out which title this series is posted under, Azure. I think to answer your question, I don't think it's going to be posted immediately. Crystal, can you allude to that, where it would probably be posted?
Absolutely. So all of our webinars, all of our recordings will be posted on the website, but they will be posted on YouTube under pragmaticworks.com tomorrow. And you guys will also receive an email link to be able to view them straight from your email as well tomorrow.
And there'll also be a blog post made as well too, which will also have a link directly to the webinar, I believe.
Correct. Correct. So the webinar link will be in the email tomorrow, as well as, but it will be on YouTube too as well, under Pragmatic Works. So you should be able to review. And if you're looking for any of the following webinars, they will all be on our website. If you visit Event Calendar, you can just click on it. You can register from there too as well. but you guys should all be receiving an email later on today about the next webinar as well. Does that
And that's Krista does all the magic here, so
yeah.
she knows.
So, but if you guys have any questions, please feel free as usual. You guys can email me. My email is always at any of the webinar links. It's at the bottom of any of the webinar emails as well. So just please feel free to email me.
And they can even, I suppose.
Yep, you can tweet. You can tweet us at Pragmatic Works. You can like us on Facebook and write me and message me there. I will get all of it. You can message me on YouTube. I will get that too.
Okay. All right, well, thank you, everyone. I think I don't see any more questions, so I think we're done, but I appreciate that and hope to see you next Tuesday. We're going to be again talking about Azure Lift and Shift.
All right, awesome, Michael. Thank you so much for hosting. We appreciate it. As for everybody else, like I stated earlier, you guys will receive a recording link probably around noon tomorrow in your email box. If you guys have any questions until then, please feel free to contact Michael or myself. And if you guys are looking to learn more about DBA Managed Services, please feel free to visit our link. I will put it in the chat for you guys really quickly. And thank you guys so much. And I hope you guys all have a wonderful day or evening or morning. And I'm placing the link to DBA Managed Services in the chat right now too, for those who are looking for that.
Okay, great.